Okay, welcome everyone to Webinar Wednesdays, the Alliance Against Violence and Adversity webinar series. I'm your host for today, Andrea Dean. I'm the program manager for AVA and the Women's and Girls Health Hub lead. Throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function to pose questions to our speaker, which will make the time we discuss in the Q&A portion at the end of this webinar easier for everyone. On a national level, we'd like to encourage all Canadian and visitors to Canada to learn more about the Indigenous people of the lands in which we live, work, and visit, and become engaged allies. Together, we as Canadians, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, respect the self-determination of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit, and their rights and responsibilities in culture, languages, and the pursuit of wellness. Today's webinar is titled Digital Innovation and Intersection Approaches Addressing Gender-Based Violence and Its Impacts. We're joined today by Lucrezia Spagnolo from VESTA, Social Innovations Technology. Lucrezia is the founder and CEO of VESTA Social Innovations Technology, a social enterprise dedicated to transforming responses to gender-based violence through innovative technology and community engagement. With a mission to end rape culture, VESTA develops trauma-informed digital tools that empower survivors and facilitate access to justice. A graduate of McGill University, Lucrezia has over 15 years of leadership experience, and her commitment to social impact was ignited during her time as an executive in residence at the Ashkoa Foundation, where she enhanced the operational capacity of social enterprise. In addition to her work at VESTA, through collaborations with academic partners, Lucrezia contributes to the disclosure on how digital solutions can support gender-based violence survivors. Through her work, she aims to lower barriers to reporting and increasing access to resources, ensuring individuals have agency, choice, and equal treatment under the law. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lucrezia. I'm incredibly excited for your talk. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much. Actually, it's Lucretia. And
Sorry, I'm so
it's
sorry. I
okay.
practiced right before, and then of course I said it wrong.
It's okay. It's okay. It happens all the time. But I do really appreciate you having me here today. And thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm making sure you can see the slides. And as they're moving, is everything okay? You can see the slide.
Everything looks great. Thank you.
Wonderful. So thanks so much for that introduction, like I said. And I thought today, actually, it occurred to me that there'd probably be many people joining today that this is the first time they're hearing about me or hearing about VESTA. And so I thought I would make it a kind of a presentation where it kind of talks a little bit broad about technology and then narrows it down into specifically VESTA, the work that we do, what we've done in Canada, what we've done so far, and how we've been using technology and integrating that with intersectional approaches and with community engagement. And then what our next evaluation, or rather evolution, of our project is. So once again, thank you so much. And before I get started, I too want to acknowledge, actually, I'm coming to you from Toronto, actually, which is the traditional land of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And it's now also home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. With that said, and as I mentioned, is that we've used technology. My name is Lucretia, and before there was VESTA or there was any kind of technology, I had an idea. Back in about 2016, 2017, I had just moved back to Canada from having lived abroad, and I found myself here at a time where rape culture and the discussion of some big profile cases were just hitting the news. And I realized that I was spending my days learning about technology, and in the evenings, I couldn't stop reading the news and I couldn't stop reading the newspapers. And I realized that emotions were just kind of bubbling up and memories were starting to surface again. And really emotions and that I thought I had dead and buried were actually coming back up to the surface. And since I was spending my days reading about technology, because I was looking at what I was going to do next in my career, I kind of started having this idea, and this was before Me Too, and I thought, well, is it possible to build technology that could help support survivors and that can support individuals like me, or that I'm one of those 95% of individuals that we hear about that experience gender-based violence and never report? And I wondered, is there a way to actually use technology and leverage it to help build trust and wrap services around survivors? So that's where the idea started. So, as I mentioned, my name is Lucrezia, and I'm here today as the founder and CEO of VESTA Social Innovation Technologies. I like to think of VESTA as a social enterprise that works at the intersection of gender-based violence work, technology, and access to justice. So, I wanted to start broad and really talk about technology first as a whole, or rather, it contextualized in this context. I realize as a whole might be a little broad statement, but when I first started talking about technology, and like I said, this was before Me Too. It was early days. It was about 2016, 2017 when I was formulating the ideas. Over time, we've seen technology has developed quite a bit, but what I wanted to understand was that is or how is technology current being used to support survivors of gender-based violence and to address gender-based violence even on a global scale, not just here in Canada. And according to the United Nations, actually, there have been many technological innovations or tools that have been developed around the world in different countries. I just put up this graph just to show you this diagram of different solutions that are being addressed and rolled out in different parts of the world. And according to the United Nations women, is that they realize they classify technology and kind of that's being used to address gender-based violence in three categories. The first is what they call an accompaniment model, which is, if you will, a model where technology is used to help support survivors and connect them to services or resources. The second one is what they call training for implementers. So that is awareness and training purposes to help support individuals and organizations that are providing services to survivors. And the third one is what they call coordination or integration of national strategies. So again, more awareness building and dissemination of information, as well as trying to bring resources together. What VESTA, and when I look at this classification, I think of the work that we do, is falls closer to the first model, which is about connecting survivors to services. But it also now, in our next iteration, will also be looking at touching on the second section, which talks about training to support service providers. So again, kind of thinking about technology and some of the, you will, kind of general advantages that technology could support or provide in this sector. And I picked three of them. There are many, but I picked three. And I thought the first one that I wanted to discuss was really kind of the pervasiveness of technology, and that technology touches every aspect of our lives. And so just about everyone we know now has phones, smart services, internet connectivity, realizing that a lot of individuals then could be used, technology could be used then to provide vital information to individuals and communities. We also realize technology has this great capacity to collect data and understand and analyze data and look at it from a larger, if you will, macro perspective, and see if we can look at it and understanding, identifying trends, or really to evaluate what is an effective strategy versus a non. And we also know about the anonymity of technology could provide pathways for survivors to be able to share their story, access resources without the fear of retaliation. So I started thinking about it in terms of what is the strategic use of technology? What are the things that we could look at? And what I came to realize is really if we look at technology as a strategic tool in our fight against gender-based violence. And so one of the first things I really wanted to look at is, can it help break down some barriers and meet survivors where they are? I'm going to talk to you a little bit later about some of the research that we did here in Canada. And what we realized was just about everyone within our focus groups, before they disclosed to any one person, turned to the internet. Our focus groups had survivors ranging from age to 18 to 80 years old. I'll admit, I don't think the 80-year-old turned to technology first, but most individuals did. We also wanted to look at technology about, can it expand options? Can it provide more options and pathways for individuals that might be currently available to them in their current community? We also realized that technology can be used to really foster change and action. I mean, we've seen hashtags go around the world that actually have facilitated and grown awareness. For example, hashtag Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and many others. So we do know that technology can be used to raise awareness and mobilize change. And the other one is that I wanted to highlight would be data insights. We talked about it before very briefly, but one of the challenges that I found in this sector is even trying to understand benchmarks. We realize there are so many gaps in information. I've talked to so many researchers about gaps in data and how technology can help support further research and further implementations and development of different services. But we also know we can't talk about technology without saying that, unfortunately, there are some bad actors that are actually weaponizing technology. So we have to be aware about some of the characteristics around technology, especially as someone who's looking to develop technology to support survivors. I feel that it's incumbent upon me and my organization and everyone I work with to understand that technology can actually be used to can be weaponized. And so as we conscientiously build technology, we really have to think about it. And so, again, when we talk about the fact technology is everywhere, we also have to be consciously aware that really, because of the fact it's everywhere, false images or false information can spread around a community or around the world in seconds. We also realize that as we're looking at data, and we talked about data, we also know that if we don't store it securely, we don't protect individuals' privacy, that actually that then information then could be used against survivors instead of to support them. We also want to look at, we talked about the anonymity of technology. And so it can help provide survivors access to different resources and maybe access resources without fear of retaliation. But we also realize that that same characteristic of technology is used by perpetrators to hide their own identities, and sometimes then they can use some of the technology that's already been developed for surveillance or grooming purposes. I'll give you an example. I have a rescue dog. She's actually, when we first got her, she liked to kind of escape. And so one of the things I was really concerned about is finding her. And so I went out and I bought an air tag, and I air tagged my dog so that I can find her if she's ever far away from me. And at first I thought, this is wonderful. And here it is on my phone. I can see wherever she is. And then it kind of clicked. And I went, oh my God, I can just drop this in somebody's purse. I can drop it in somebody's car. I can drop it in so many different places. And it was never the intended use of that air tag, but it can be used to surveil somebody. And so that's when I say about developing technology, be conscious about what you're developing, how you're developing, and how it could inadvertently be used or weaponized. So this is kind of like a general information about technology and a really, really quick overview. But I wanted to introduce you a little bit more to some of the research that we did here at VESTA. Because again, you can look at research and you can read as much as you want, but I really wanted to look at, really in Canada, particularly we started in Ontario, how are survivors looking at technology? And frankly, right at the beginning, back in 2018, 2019, would they trust technology? Would they trust an application if they were looking at something to report their sexual assault or gender-based violence? Would they trust it? So I reached out and found partners with the University of British Columbia. We also connected with the Ontario Coalition of Rape Crisis Centers. I went to speak at many of their events, and then I spoke to many of their members and asked them if they would help us put together focus groups across this province that showed a cross-section of survivors from different regions of Ontario. And so we also looked at them from more urban settings, more rural settings, and a cross-section of demographics as well. because our goal was really to see, would they trust technology? And I'm not going to go through the slide line by line, but if you can see, what we really identified was two key factors that individuals were concerned with. They had technological concerns and they had what we called emotional concerns. And what we realized is that the anxiety that was created around reporting sexual violence was actually intertwined with their technological concerns, and that you couldn't separate the two, and that you had to address both the emotional concerns and the technological concerns if you wanted to build trust within a system. So the recommendations that came out of that was really about creating a system and an online reporting tool, if that's what we were looking to build, that had robust privacy and security issues. And we also realized that we had to add some kind of human element or human support options to alleviate some of those concerns and really to balance the needs that survivors had and some of the fears that they had around using technology. We also interviewed not just survivors, but we also looked at community partners, community agencies, counselors, support services, and also law enforcement, and see what concerns and needs they had around an online reporting system. And we realized that we had to kind of balance, if we wanted to find something that could be an effective use, we had to balance the needs of all the organizations and individuals within that group, which proved to be challenging. I'll get to that a little later. We also wanted to talk about, oh, it's not changing slides. The slide's not changing? There we go. There we go. Can the slide
Yeah,
change
it's
now?
going. Yeah,
Excellent.
it is. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's going.
Wonderful. So the other thing then we also wanted to look at is, as I said, as you're building technology, you really have to make sure that when you think about it, you have to think about how actually can it be used, how can it be weaponized, how can it be used against someone. So again, we went back to the University of British Columbia and we partnered with them, and we did a systemic research of, I think at the end it was well over 200 papers, where we looked at what were some of the characteristics of technology and how can it be used to support survivors, but again, how could it be used, unfortunately, to facilitate abuse. And what we realized was that it was certain characteristics could be weaponized. And so the only way that we could develop trauma-informed, survivor-centric system was to co-develop, co-design it with stakeholders. We also wanted to make sure that they were involved in that process. And we also wanted to make sure that we made it as user-centric and trauma-informed as possible, because there were certain things that were outside of control. For example, we looked at cross-jurisdictional issues, and we also looked at inconsistent laws across the country. But what we could do was try to co-develop and co-design it to make it as survivor-centric as possible. So what does that mean? All in all, it meant that what our research showed that technology could support survivors on their journey towards healing and to justice, but we did have to look at it from a very robust privacy and security. We had to put the survivor at the center to make sure that their needs were being met to help lower some of the barriers that they were experiencing. And we had to have a collaboration with stakeholders within the community if we were really to address any of the gaps and any of the issues that the survivors were facing. So what did that evolve into? That evolved into what we call VESTA Community. VESTA Community is a web application that can be accessed by any internet-connected device, and it allows individuals to document their experience, connect to support services, and for those that want to, report to law enforcement. We gave them multiple options. The default, if you will, is private. We're not collecting any user information or data. Users can access it anonymously and confidentially. We also wanted to test it to see would individuals use it, because you can develop technology, but if no one uses it, is it really impactful? No. So we partnered with the Kingston Police Service and the Kingston Sexual Assault Center, and later on Queen's University came on board, and we conducted a small pilot in the Kingston area to see would individuals use the application. We also were developing, if you will, a partner portal that went with it. So there's a front-end version that users can use to document their experience, connect to resources, as well as to report. But we also connected a partner portal so those individual organizations could then connect with survivors that had consented and wanted to be contacted. So what does that mean when we talk about building technology? So, we really talked about developing it and designing it for safety. So I'll give you an example of a technical application or choice that we made and how it impacted individuals. So one of it was about, well, we originally thought we were going to build a mobile application. And what we realized through our focus groups and through feedback that we'd gotten, that actually survivors were concerned about having a mobile app on their phone and something they had to download. So we created a web application, which is something that can be accessed from any location as long as it's an internet connected device. And what that means is that what we were trying to build was self-care within that first disclosure. Not having that fear of, oh my God, that anxiety, I have to download this app. And what about if somebody sees it on my phone? And think about hiding it in some way. So it was really about trying to give them that option right from the beginning and to create that sense of safety and that sense of self-care, because we were also building out those resources and giving them options. We also co-developed it with our community partners and with survivor feedback. And so with the issue about that is that we realized there was a lot of feedback about the fragmentation within the system. And over again, what we got, the system was that individuals felt traumatized by the process of reporting or connecting with services because they had to tell their story over and over again. So when we started thinking about what does survivor-centric design mean, how could we help reduce the retelling and re-traumatization? And the idea was that if the VESTA report arrived to support services and to law enforcement for those that wanted to report before they did, would that help reduce the retelling? Would that help reduce the re-traumatization? And the thing we heard the most often, the feedback we got most often with the application was what they liked was, in their words, a kinder, gentler introduction to the reporting process. So obviously we talked about privacy and security by design, and the whole thing is about protecting their data, protecting that storing of the data, and building out trust. So I'll quickly run through, but during the time of it, we had about 2,300 individuals access the application. We got about 6,500 reports during that time. And what we realized was actually about 45% of individuals were using the app to connect with law enforcement, which actually surprised us. Our research told us that we'd get about 100 anonymous reports before we ever got the first report to police, and that's not what happened. We got the first report to police within 10 days. What we also realized, though, is that our research told us that it couldn't have been just a reporting application. We had to build out resources and we had to help individual survivors. And so what we did is we built out over 90 resources ranging in information from legal support services to understanding your rights to even interactive healing rooms. And in the last year alone, we had over 100,000 events created. That means people downloading, interacting with our resources. And over 50,000 individuals accessed it in the last year alone. But when you pilot a project and you roll it out, you also want to collect some feedback and see how can you make it better. And one of the things that we got, so I wanted to highlight, I was really challenging trying to build out this slide and saying, goodness, we have so much feedback. What do I want to highlight? And so I wanted to highlight that one of the things that kept coming up is that when you're working in this sector, we know a lot of organizations have resource and capacity constraints. And what we realized is that we also had to make sure that unfortunately, we realized as we were trying to test this out and build it, we end up duplicating some processes instead of integrating them. And so we really needed to look at that once again and said, no, that's not what we wanted to do. We also realized we had some constraints when it came to organizational challenges. There is high staff, employee, and leadership turnover in the sector. And so what that also highlighted was that our training model that we had a train the trainer model. When we worked with our partners, we realized that actually we needed to rethink that model, because what was happening was that there was turnover within our partners, that knowledge was not being transferred. So going forward, we would have to retrain that. We also realized that individuals were showing up at their counseling sessions at the Sexual Assault Center. Some of them were asking for support and help with their VESTA report. But the question wasn't actually about the technology or the app itself. What they had questions about was how to contextualize it within the larger reporting or as their journey towards counseling or healing and how it pertained to them, and realized those were questions that they couldn't answer. So what was the evolution of VESTA and where are we going? And so I was actually giving a presentation similar to this, but in person, a few months ago back in November. And after I presented VESTA, I actually was approached by a couple of individuals and said, this is very interesting and there's some very promising information coming out of your report. And I'm wondering, have you ever considered adapting VESTA community in your application and your programming to address intimate partner violence within the immigrant, refugee, and non-status women community? And as you can imagine, I was kind of taken aback by that because it felt like an overwhelming challenge. But there was a couple of things that resonated with me was one, I went back to our data and I realized that over 67% of individuals that were using our application had known and named offenders. So actually it was evolving. We had developed a tool that was for reporting sexual assault. And what we started realizing is actually we were getting reports not just about sexual assault, but it was actually leaning towards intimate partner or domestic violence. The other thing I thought of is, remember I mentioned when those individuals were showing up at their counseling sessions asking for information? Well, we realized that what they were asking really was for help to navigate the system. And because we've seen a lot of duplication and actually silos kind of built within this industry, what about if we borrowed an idea from the health department? And actually we realized in Ontario, and I'm thinking other provinces as well, there's something called a navigator program within the Ministry of Health. And what it does is there are nurses and nurse practitioners that help individuals navigate the healthcare system. And I thought, well, what about if we actually built out a navigator program? And what we did is we expanded not just the support of the sexual assault centers, but we actually built out a navigator program. And we embedded that program not within VESTA, but actually within the community partners. So I reached out to organizations like Settlement Services and organizations that work directly with newcomers and say, are you getting disclosures? Do you feel equipped? How do you think about a navigator program and using technology? And would you help us co-develop, co-design it, test it, implement it, and test it within your communities to see if it could help support survivors? We also wanted to see was what's justice mean to individuals, especially as you're looking to different populations. Justice means different things to different people. Not everybody and not every crime is a police crime or want to report to law enforcement. Some individuals have more concern about just their own journey and might be looking towards maybe a divorce or just looking for, if they're in school, they just want that person not in their same classes. So what does justice actually mean, and what are the avenues and the pathways we need to look at? And we talk a lot about intersectionality, but what does that truly mean? What does it mean to be truly intersectional? And does that mean that we couldn't separate out cultural needs and religious concerns from the supports we provide? And unfortunately, when you're looking at from technology, sometimes how do you make sure that you're incorporating those cultural and responses, and that you've got actually their core concerns are taken into consideration? And then we wanted to know is that could we then build this out as a framework where then we co-develop, co-design it, we make sure we are intersectional, we make sure we are listening to survivors. Could we then build out a model that could be applicable and replicable to other populations, other cities, other geographical areas? So what we wanted to make sure is what were the key strategies for impact, especially if we were going to be focusing on marginalized or racialized communities, especially if we were looking at immigrant, refugee, and non-status women. Well, again, we want to make sure that what we're building out and what we're measuring for impact is that do we have intersectional supports? Are we also building out capacity and really addressing collaboration and sustainability within the sector? And could technology help support that? And again, are we building out some kind of data-driven solution that actually informs strategies and help increase effectiveness of the programming within the community? So the key focus areas, and I know I'm going through this really quickly, is what we're looking at in this next iteration is really about building. We're looking at building trust. We're looking at breaking down those barriers and actually building bridges between community and community partners, and really about wrapping services around individuals and bespoke, if you will, services being supported by technology. We want to make sure that we're educating and we're building awareness, not just within the survivor community, but also bringing together different service providers. So, for example, I mentioned we had worked with sexual assault centers. I've connected with settlement organizations. I've also connected with community legal clinics. And to understand how do we then bring all these kind of partners together all in one place where we then can help wrap those services around those survivors. Because then that increases accessibility and multiple options for survivors. And so we want to make sure that we're then creating more pathways for them, not limiting them. And of course, we want to make sure that we have robust privacy and security mechanisms in place and practices in place to make sure that any of our data collection methodology is then conscientiously and it is also accessible, but always protecting the survivor. So we already have committed partners to this stage of our project. I've connected with certain settlement organizations, as I mentioned, community legal clinics. I've actually also connected with some researchers because we want to make sure that we continue to build research-backed and evidence-based solutions. So we've also connected with evaluators to make sure that we also have a results measurement framework in place so that we can actually measure the impact and not just number of interactions, but can we quantify the impact that's actually happening? So that is a very quick summary of VESTA, how we got here, where we're going next. And I would just wanted to open it up now to questions. And of course, if anybody has any questions beyond this and they want to connect with me or learn more about our project and be part of it in any way, we're always open to critical feedback and partners to help create a more inclusive, accessible, and support system. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. It was absolutely fabulous. I think the work you guys are doing is incredible and such an innovative way to go about things. Um, I have a question for you about Vesta's long-term goals and visions and scaling the innovations globally for other vulnerable populations. Is that something that you guys have thought about? Because it is really just such a amazing platform that you're able to reach out to people in rural communities and all over the place. Yeah.
Absolutely. And in fact, that's why I'm looking at it in terms of not just building out one particular solution, but rather building out a framework that helps us understand then how can we build something that is adaptable and replicable, right, to other vulnerable populations and other also geographic areas. Because as you said, I mean, there's so much need, not just here, but around the world. But we want to make sure that it's impactful and actually can make an impact in the local community. Because one thing is we realize there is no one size fits all. You know, we had the opportunity to take the technology as it was and just offer it to different communities and just roll it out in different geographic areas. But I realized that that felt that it would have been, we had so much feedback where we could actually go deeper and really develop what we had already done. And I thought that was more responsible in terms of creating technology, is that if we go deeper, develop it further before we expand geographically.
Yeah, that's a great idea for sure. Sorry, I see there's a question in the chat, but I just wanted to ask one more thing about, you mentioned that you were worried about older populations not using it. But then you said that you did have a bunch of uptake from that population. What were some of the barriers that you thought that you would see that you didn't end up seeing? And are there still some barriers for that age group
So I
that you
should
guys are
clarify,
addressing? Okay.
I, I should clarify is that we had individuals in an older demographic within our focus groups.
Okay.
And so what we did find was that their response was when we asked, where's the first place you turn? That overwhelmingly, what we heard over and over again in those focus groups was before somebody ever disclosed to somebody, is they actually turned to the internet. Because unless they literally were from the sector, most people didn't think, oh, I was assaulted or I was violated. It's more of a feeling, it's like an ickiness of a feeling. And so a lot of individuals within our focus group turned to the internet to try to understand what had happened to them before they ever disclosed. What I mentioned was that we did have someone that was in her 80s. I believe it was a woman in her 80s that was part of our focus groups. And they said that they didn't turn to technology, but they did see that others would turn to technology. Not during that particular focus group, but I have had individuals and organizations approach us saying, would we ever considering adapting what we're building to help support elder abuse? And that's why
Yeah.
looking at it from building out a framework feels so important because it's not just about developing tech. You want to make sure that the tech works within a larger framework and you create a kind of a protocol around it so then you can adapt it for different populations.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And I was thinking with elder abuse, to not just have them self-reporting, but allow the platform to have others that report that it's occurring, would be a good addition. The question that we have in the chat is, how do you integrate the concept of digital divide in your practice and research?
I'm wondering if they can clarify what they mean by digital divide. Is it access to technology or access?
Um, Hopefully they'll add,
I don't know if that person could.
yeah,
um,
add some more there. It looks like they're typing, I think. Um, so we'll just give that a second to get some clarification there. Um, and I wanted to ask a little bit about the use of AI and how you're gonna use that more in your framework, or if you are planning on using it more.
So it's interesting you ask because when my first thought for Vesta back in 2018 was my thought was we were going to develop this like AI chatbot to help support survivors. And I
Yeah.
realized in that 2018 the technology didn't really exist. It wasn't there. And frankly, most of the conversations I end up having with individuals, whether they were survivors or organizations or law enforcement, everybody was so concerned about can AI be empathetic? And so I realized we stopped talking about what were the issues and the problems and the barriers we were trying to address. They became all about can technology do? And
Mm.
so I realized we dropped the idea of artificial intelligence at that time because we thought, what is the problem? What are the barriers we're trying to address? And sometimes, you don't want to just build technology for the sake of building technology. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Now, as technology has progressed, we realize that there are some benefits maybe in using artificial intelligence or even data science, in this space. But again, we want to do it conscientiously and we want to understand like how do we best use it. So it's one of the reasons why I continue to connect with researchers and to understand what are the ethical uses, how can we ethically create or use AI in this space, how again, always thinking about it from a data and privacy and security aspect of it as well. So there are some ideas floating around in the background, but like I said, it's all about first understanding what problem would we want to address with it specifically, and can it be done with that user at the center and making sure it's done ethically and responsibly.
Yeah, it's amazing how far AI has come in the last couple years and how many people are relying on it for different things that they never thought it would even be capable of doing. So yeah, I'm really interested to hear more about the future of AI and your work. They did clarify their question. It said it's not a question about access, but also about the knowledge of how to use it, talking about the 3 degrees of the digital divide.
Mhm. So I think that one of the things that, again, is that technology is a tool. It's not the solution, is the way I look at it. So that is
Yes.
one of the reasons why when we look at, again, it's so important to involve the community and different stakeholders in the development because, as we know, in certain communities or even within certain populations, they won't have access to technology or don't want to use technology. So, is it we don't want to impose or enforce it on any one individual, let alone a population. So when we start looking at that co-development, co-design, even Andrea, your question was, in elder abuse, could it then be used for someone to report on behalf of? Or how can then technology be used? So part of that, again, it goes back to consciously developing and responsibly developing technology to the best of its use in a particular situation. So you can't build a one size fits all and not take into effect some of the barriers and some of that access to technology or the barriers to it can be challenging. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but the answer is that I don't know all the answers, is that I'm working with different organizations to help us get as close as possible to solutions that can make an impact.
Yeah, I absolutely love this idea because I really do feel that these type of technologies are going to be what bridge the gaps for people to be able to get resources, get justice. Having everything in one place is just absolutely fantastic idea. Um, yeah, I guess I do have a couple more questions if you're up for them.
Of course.
Um, yeah, you talked a little bit about your partner organizations, but have you been really involved now that it's set up with advertising and just getting like the grassroots shelters, and healthcare providers getting everyone's awareness of your product? Because until we met, in the CanWatch meeting, I had never heard of this, and we've been doing work for quite a few years now. So I was just so excited to hear about what you were doing.
So actually, that's part of the next phase is
Okay.
that when I started Vesta, like I said, I started it prior to Me Too, and then Me Too happened.
Ah,
And I honestly backed away from, although many individuals and many people told me that I should have taken advantage, if you will, of the awareness and the situation to really promote what we were building. But it was so early in our development that I felt that going out there and trying to promote something that hadn't been tested, it was still a hypothesis, right? What could it develop? What could it be? So I deliberately kept our pilot small and deliberately focused on one area. Specifically, I did reach out to different organizations, don't get me wrong, and I had conversations. I realized at the end of 2024, I did a count, and I reached out to over 800 individuals and organizations personally, or through email to let them know about Vesta, but a large scale, as in huge social media push or going to the different organizations. No, that was part of, I first wanted to see if it could be used, could it have a positive impact? And then it was like, okay, now we can tell people we've got some data, we've got some information. I mean, there's other data that we were able to ascertain, and then go out and say, okay, is there value in what we've done? How can we make it better? And so now in this second phase, as we're looking to build it out, that is part of building awareness. And honestly, I'm doing more even podcasts and webinars such as this to start raising that awareness and bringing together even partners that will help us raise the awareness of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I would love to have you added to our innovative practices and programs inventory so that people looking for different ways to help support everyone experiencing gender-based violence will be able to access information about this fantastic platform. Yeah, sometimes it's important not to get ahead of everything when you're trying to grow something, just to make sure growing too fast sometimes can cause more problems than it's worth. But I think you took the time to create a wonderful platform, and it's really going to do some amazing work, I think, here. Um,
Thank you.
And then there's a question for Ava saying, are you going to create a webinar about technology use in the context of coercive control? Yes, we do have a bunch of webinars for October. October is Cybersecurity Month, so we are going to talk a little bit about online types of harassment and that kind of stuff over October. So we have a few different guests that are going to be talking about different um, things that people, different technologies that people are using to perpetrate abuse or stalk or harass, different things like that, because we really do live in a different world now where you can be stalked and harassed by someone who's not even in the same country as you and makes your life completely miserable. So, um, and it looks like there's another question in the chat. Oh, it's just a thank you. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming today. I think we learned some amazing things about your platform, and I'm really excited for our collaboration to grow and to be able to really promote your platform within the AVA community and, of course, on our social media platforms. So, thank you so much for coming today. And if people could take time to use the survey feature for the feedback. It's in the chat. Thank you all for coming today, and our webinars are posted on our YouTube channel, so you can view them or share them with others that you wished would have joined. And we would be happy for you to share this webinar as well to anyone that you would like. Um, so thank you again for joining us. And I look forward to our future collaborations.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this. And like I said, if anybody has any questions, please connect with me.
Thank you
Definitely.
so much.
We'll also be sure to provide, when we send out the feedback to the registers for the meeting today, we'll also provide your contact information for your company so people can reach out directly to you.
Thank you.